As we celebrate this joyous day of Yom Yerushalayim, I want to take this moment to ask ourselves, what is it that we're celebrating? Why is this day so happy? What are we trying to accomplish on this day? And I think in order to understand this question of what is Yom Yerushalayim, we have to ask ourselves, what is Yerushalayim? What is so special about Yerushalayim? What does Yerushalayim represent? We know for thousands of years since the Chorban, since the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Jews have been proclaiming Imashkachech Yerushalayim Tishkach Yemini, that if I forget Yerushalayim, if I take my focus off of Yerushalayim, that it's not worth living. I can't live. Forget my right side. And for thousands of years, there's been a yearning to go back to Yerushalayim. And what is it that we're yearning for? What is it that we're hoping for, that we look towards when we say 3 times a day, Yerushalayim Ircha Barachim Tashu, that we should return to that city of yours, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yerushalayim. And I believe that the answer is found in the Rambam. That the Rambam tells us that when the Chorban took place, the Rambam suggests that perhaps the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael ceased to exist. But he says it's not true in Yerushalayim. In Yerushalayim, the Kedusha remained. And the Kedusha can't be destroyed. Why? Because Yerushalayim is the place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Shekhinah, was dwelling. And when the Shekhinah dwells somewhere, it can never be destroyed. A building can be destroyed, a Beis HaMikdash can be destroyed, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Shekhinah is everlasting. And therefore, Yerushalayim is everlasting. What that means, Yerushalayim is the place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwells. It's the place that we encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's there that we're constantly yearning for. I'd like to share with you a story that took place in my life, that has shaped my life, that is connected to Yerushalayim. It takes place on a trip before I was coming to Eretz Yisrael, coming to this land to learn for the summer. I stopped on a group trip to Prague. And on that trip, we stopped in a place called Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was one of the concentration camps that the Nazis killed, murdered, and slaughtered Jews. And on that trip, we took a tour of this concentration camp, and we walked around the concentration camp. And we saw the places where the Jews lived, the beds, 10 people, how it was all crammed together, and the horrible living conditions. And we saw the crematorium, a crematorium that had a river flowing behind it. And our tour guide told us, at one night, they burned so many Jewish bodies. There was so much ash that the river stopped flowing. And they threw all the ash into the river. And that was so inspiring. But what happened next changed my life forever. Our tour guide took us into a home that was found on the grounds of the concentration camp. Someone was living in that home. And he knocked on the door and he asked the person living in the house, can we please go into the back? And he paid him some money and he took us into the back of his house. And in the back of it, in his backyard there's a garage. And in that garage, we went inside that garage, all of our group together, crammed into the space. It was dark, it was muggy. And our tour guide lit a match. And as he lit that match, and our eyes started to adjust, we started to realize that it looks like there was letters on the wall. And he lit some candles, and as he lit more and more candles, we realized it was Hebrew letters on the wall. And as our eyes finally adjusted, we realized it was psukim that was written on that wall. And it soon became clear that this room was not a normal garage. This room was a shul that people used during the Holocaust. It was a shul that they risked their lives to go to. And on the walls of the shul were psukim. Powerful psukim. Achenu kol beis Yisrael, a prayer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please watch over Klal Yisrael, to take them out of darkness and bring them to light. Habeit mishamayim re'ei, a pasuk where we say every day, that we say Mondays and Thursdays at Tachanun of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, look, we are like sheep being sent to the slaughter. And that was so inspiring. But the most inspiring sentence in that entire shul was the pasuk that was on top of where the Aron Kodesh may have been. If there was an Aron Kodesh. If there wasn't, that's where it would have been. And the following pasuk was there, and this pasuk changed my life forever. The pasuk that asked Hashem to return our eyes to Yerushalayim. That these people, our brothers who were suffering at that moment, the only thing that they were thinking about, the only thing that was on the top of their mind was Yerushalayim. Because that's the dream of the Jewish people for 2,000 years. For 2,000 years, all a Jew could think about was to please HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bring me back to Yerushalayim, bring me back to that place where I can feel your Shekhinah. Chevra, it's that place that when Rabbi Akiva was walking by with the Tanaim, we know the famous story in the Gemara, that when they were walking by the ruins of the Beis Hamikdash, and they saw a fox coming out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holiest place in the world. It was after the destruction, everybody started crying over there. They said, look at our Beis Hamikdash, what happened to our Beis Hamikdash? And Rabbi Akiva was smiling. And the Tanaim turned to Rabbi Akiva and asked him, why are you smiling? Why are you laughing? And Rabbi Akiva says, because Chevra, the Navi tells us that Yerushalayim will be destroyed. But the Navi also tells us that Yerushalayim will be rebuilt. And if the Nevuah came true, the prophecy came true that it's being destroyed, and it is destroyed, then that means that the prophecy that it will become alive again will also be true. Chevra, that dream of Rabbi Akiva, we're living that dream. We're back in Yerushalayim. We're back in the place of the Shekhinah. The Navi tells us they'll be old and they'll be young in the streets of Yerushalayim. We are living that time period. And that's the simcha of Yom Yerushalayim. That we're back. That we have Yerushalayim. That we can begin to sense the Shekhinah again in our lives. And this is the happiest day, because we've been waiting for it for thousands and thousands of years. Be it in time of the Chorban, by Rabbi Akiva, be it in Theresienstadt during the Holocaust, during crusades and inquisitions. This is the moment we've been waiting for. But we have a challenge, a very large challenge. And the challenge is found, I believe, in the book, the introduction to Shalom Gold's book, Touching History from Williamsburg to Yerushalayim. And he recounts the following thing that took place during the Six-Day War. He writes, as the morning dawned, it was obvious that this was going to be another cloudless day with a brilliant blue sky. It was the third day of the war. It didn't have a name yet. Israeli paratroopers burst into the old city of Yerushalayim, the city that had been fought for over so many times in the past, was now again experiencing the deafening sounds of war, but with a big difference. It was not an invading army. It was not the Assyrians or the Babylonians, Romans, Crusaders, Mamluks, Turkish, or British. Jerusalem's children were returning home. The city that had not been under Jewish rule for 2,000 years was being redeemed from her captivity by her children. The young soldiers made their way quickly through the narrow streets and serpentine alleyways of the old city towards their objective, the Kotel and Har Habayit. For 19 years, Jews had not been permitted to pray at the Kotel. So the Israeli soldiers didn't know how to get there. They didn't know where to go until they saw a young man cowering with fear in the alleyway. They assured him that they meant no harm. Just direct us to the Kotel, they said. Trembling, he showed them the way. He remained standing, watching as they hurried off until they got to the Har Habayis, where they transfixed an Israeli flag. Avram Rabinovich, in his book, The Battle of Jerusalem, tells us that this young man was Abdullah Schleifer, a New York-born Jew who had converted to Islam, married a Jordanian girl, and was working as a reporter in the old city. Rabinovich's closing comments is so simple yet so insightful. What a strange witness to one of the greatest moments in Jewish history. Totally distant and alienated from his people and his heritage, he didn't experience the holy thrill and the profound joy with fellow Jews worldwide. Schleifer was culturally and religiously orphaned, Jewishly blind. What a pity, a Jewish soul wandering, confused, troubled, and lost. And Rabbi Shalom goes on to say, the story keeps coming back to haunt him, time after time again over the past 40 years, because he made a painful discovery. One can be a fine Jew who observes mitzvot and studies Torah. He could be Hasidish, Litvish, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and all shades in between, and he could also be blind. He has spoken to hundreds of people who simply don't see the majestic divine process unfolding before our eyes here in Eretz Yisrael. Their vision is blurred, their ability to comprehend the meaning of events severely limited. They just don't get it. They're suffering a severe form of historic blindness, the Schleifer syndrome. They don't understand the great miracles taking place in front of our eyes, because the present can have meaning and significance only if it's connected to the past. Without the past, the present simply pales into a series of lackluster mundane events, eliciting a reaction that is equally lifeless. However, what we understand from this story is that if we're not careful, we could be blind and miss the tremendous gifts in front of our eyes. We can miss the joy of Yom Yerushalayim. We forget the gift of coming back after 2,000 years. And our challenge on Yom Yerushalayim is not to be a Schleifer Jew. And I believe the way we do that, as Rabbi Gold tells us, is to remember the past. Remember for thousands of years all the Jews who said, realize that for 2,000 years, we've been crying for Yerushalayim. But this year, and for the past 51 years, we've been able to cry tears of joy that we returned to Yerushalayim. When we zocha to see the ultimate joy of Yerushalayim with the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, Bimheira v'yameinu, Amen v'yamein.